He shoves my suitcase out the door as he lectures me about gratitude. I don't move at first. The wheels of the suitcase rattle against the concrete, and the porch light flickers just enough to make the moment feel even smaller than it already is. Jason's voice, thick with self-importance, rolls over me in waves as he keeps talking about everything he's done for me. The hours he works, the bills. He pays the life he supposedly built for us. He delivers each line like he's reciting a speech he's practiced for years. I keep my arms wrapped around my coat, not because I'm cold, but because I know if I let my hands hang freely, he'll see them shaking. I don't want to give him that satisfaction. The night air carries the smell of wet leaves from the yard, and somewhere a dog barks short, sharp, like it's reacting to the tension between us. Jason leans against the doorframe, blocking the warm light of the hallway behind him, and I can see how much he enjoys the position he's in. He likes being above me, likes believing he has the authority to push me anywhere he wants. He mistakes my silence for surrender, but all it really means is that I'm watching. His words keep tumbling out, something about how I need time to reflect, how stepping outside for a bit will teach me appreciation. I want to laugh, but the sound wouldn't come out clean. Instead, I take in the scene like a photograph, the chipped paint on the door frame, the dull shine on his watch, the faint hum of the porch light. All of it is evidence of a life where I've spent too long trying not to escalate things. I bend down to pick up the suitcase, and as I do, he clears his throat as if expecting an apology. I straighten slowly, deliberately, and meet his eyes. There's a flicker, just one of uncertainty in his. It's quick, but it's real. He wasn't expecting eye contact. He was expecting meekness. The deadbolt clicks behind me the moment he closes the door, and the sound is final in a way he doesn't understand yet. For a second, the street feels wider than I remember. Cars pass in the distance, their headlights sweeping across the lawn like brief, indifferent spotlights. I walk down the steps, each one steady, even though my chest feels tight. I tell myself to breathe, not because I'm afraid, but because I want every sensation to settle inside me clearly. The cool night wind moves against my collar, lifting strands of my hair, and I start walking not to go anywhere, but simply to get out of the frame he tried to trap me in. I've spent years letting him narrate things that were never true. My worth, my contribution, my silence. What he doesn't understand is that silence doesn't mean absence. Silence is where you store the things that matter most, the things you don't want to waste on someone who won't hear them. As I reach the sidewalk, I glance once at the house, not out of longing, but to mark the moment. I want to remember exactly how it looks now, because by the time this story closes, it won't look the same to either of us. A car turns the corner, its headlights catching the small scuff on my suitcase. I adjust my grip and keep walking toward the street lamp, the one that flickers before it fully commits to lighting. There's an echo inside me, something between hurt and clarity, and I let it settle without rushing it. People like Jason believe power is loud, but the truth is quieter. It moves differently. It doesn't need to shout to rearrange a life. The gravel shifts under my shoes as I cross to the sidewalk opposite our house. I stop there halfway between leaving and watching, as if the air is giving me a moment to decide how to breathe next. I look back one last time. The window curtain moves, maybe from him, maybe from nothing, but I don't step closer. I don't call out. I don't argue. Instead, I let the cold wrap around me like a warning and a promise. He thinks I'm walking away empty. He thinks he's in control. He thinks this is the beginning of my collapse, not his. I grip the suitcase handle a little tighter, not because it's heavy, but because I know something he doesn't. Nothing stays buried forever. And Jason has no idea what I'm about to dig up. I didn't expect the quiet to feel so heavy once I stepped away from the house, but memory has a way of settling in all at once, and by the time I let myself think in past tense again, I can feel the weight of everything that led here pressing into the edges of my mind. I'm Monica Hale, 34, a medical billing coordinator from Columbus, Ohio. The night always had a stillness to it when Jason wasn't home, the kind of muted hush that made every small sound feel amplified, like the creak of the hallway floorboards or the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. That hush had been a companion long before he shoved me out the door, long before his voice became a blade he swung without hesitation. I remember standing in the kitchen one night months earlier, a stack of envelopes in my hands trying to make sense of numbers that didn't add up. A payment that should have cleared hadn't, and an insurance adjustment notice tucked between junk mail and a grocery flyer held a reference to a procedure I didn't recognize. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a line on a page, but it nudged something awake in me. Drew once told me at work that errors in our system often reveal more about the person involved than the mistake itself, and that line felt exactly like that. I set the envelope aside without mentioning it to Jason, not because I was afraid, but because silence can be a better container for uncertainty than confrontation. I learned early on that stillness lets truths rise to the surface faster than shouting ever could. Jason came home late that night smelling faintly of cologne he didn't wear around me. He dropped his keys onto the counter with a casual flick of his wrist, as though the gesture itself proved how tired he was. He gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, his lips barely grazing my skin, then reached for a bottle of water without asking about the stack of mail next to me. His eyes skimmed over it and then shifted away too quickly, the way people look at things they hope won't reveal what they're hiding. I watched the movement, not confronting him, just storing it. "Long day," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I nodded, letting the explanation float between us. There was a time when I used to ask more questions, but Jason taught me not to. Every inquiry was treated like an accusation, every concern turned into a flaw in my character. So I adapted. I asked fewer questions and listened more closely. It amazed me how much someone could reveal when they believed you weren't paying attention. A few days later, I found another small clue. On his dresser, beneath a pile of receipts and loose change, there was a crumpled printout of an online banking summary, partial torn at the bottom. A transfer noted, but not labeled. A number scratched out with hurried strokes, as if erasing the ink would erase the truth. I didn't touch it. I just memorized the shape of the scribble the way the pressure of the pen had dug into the paper. It wasn't evidence yet, just the shadow of something larger. That was when the thought came to me uninvited and quiet, like a whisper from a locked room. Truth is quiet until someone tries to bury it. I carried that line with me, repeated it silently when Jason grew short with me over small things, when he complained about the groceries or the house, or how tired he was from carrying everything on his shoulders. I noticed the way he kept reasserting the same narrative in different forms, insisting he was the one holding everything together. It wasn't the first time he'd done it, but this time it felt practiced, like he was preparing the ground for something. I watched the pieces shift slowly, the way his tone changed around his mother, how he'd speak loudly enough in the living room that the neighbors could hear hints through open windows. He was building an image, and I didn't yet know why, but I could feel the shape of a story forming that didn't include the truth. The day he first snapped at me over the electric bill still stands out not because of what he said, but because of how he said it leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, voice dripping with disappointment, as if I had become an inconvenience rather than a partner. What he didn't know was that I had already seen the late payment notice addressed to him, not me. It had nothing to do with my part of the household contributions. I watched him letting him talk. Letting him think the ground beneath me was crumbling while I was learning the pattern in every crack. People always reveal themselves when they think no one is keeping a record. That week the shifts grew sharper. He started leaving earlier in the mornings, slamming cabinet doors, sighing loudly whenever I asked him how his day went. He knew I could sense something, and the more he felt that, the more he tried to regain control through volume, posture, and little shows of irritation. I cleaned the kitchen one evening while he sat in the living room scrolling through his phone. The sound of his thumbs swiping across the screen had a rhythm to it, an impatient flick matched with tiny huffs of exhale. I could feel him watching me in the small glances as though measuring how much space his behavior could take up before I pushed back. But I didn't push. I cataloged. I memorized. I let him underestimate me. What Jason never understood was that silence isn't surrender. Silence is strategy. That was the truth sitting between us, gathering strength, waiting to surface. And the moment he buried it, it began to dig its own way out. The first fracture didn't arrive with a slam or a shout. It arrived with a whisper so faint most people would have missed it. But when you've been trained to listen to every shift in tone, every breath between sentences, you start to hear truth in the cracks long before it becomes loud enough to break anything. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of evening where the house felt like it was holding its breath. Jason had come home later than usual, brushing past me with a distracted kiss that barely touched my cheek. He headed straight for the bedroom, and I followed a few minutes later, not because I wanted to confront him, but because I wanted to see what version of him I would find. The air in the hallway carried a faint scent of citrus from the cleaner I'd used earlier, mixed with something sharper, new cologne lingering like a question I hadn't asked. He stood in front of the dresser, rifling through a drawer, muttering under his breath. When he heard me behind him, he straightened just enough to look as though nothing had been wrong. "Long day," he said, tossing a shirt onto the bed. The same explanation as always, but this time the words felt more like a shield than a truth. I didn't respond. Silence tended to bring out more of his real self than questions ever did. And I was right. His shoulders dropped a little, like he'd been hoping I would ask something. Maybe he'd rehearsed a story. Maybe he wanted to see if I would notice the shift in his patterns. Instead, I turned to leave the room, and that was when I heard it, the soft vibration of his phone on the dresser. The screen lit up. I didn't see everything, just a preview of a message he snatched too quickly, but the tone of his voice as he said, "It's work," told me more than the name on the notification ever could. Later that night, I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water, and that's when the real fracture formed. The room was dim lit only by the glow of the refrigerator as I opened it. From the hallway came the murmur of voices, Jason's, and another older and familiar. Evelyn? His mother? She wasn't talking loudly, but she never needed volume to make her point. She just doesn't bring much to the table. Evelyn said, her tone clipped, polished, meant to sound concerned. "You've carried her long enough." Jason didn't disagree. He didn't defend me. He didn't even hesitate. "I know," he said. "I'm tired of it." The hum of the refrigerator blended with his words, making them feel distant and close at the same time. I froze with my hand still on the door, feeling the coolness brush against my arm. Hearing him diminish me wasn't new, not entirely, but hearing him agree with her in that calm, casual way created a split inside me I couldn't unfeel. I stepped back from the light and stood in the darkness until their voices faded. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I didn't rush into explanations. Stillness reveals things if you let it. Over the next few days, I watched him with new eyes. I noticed how he shifted whenever money came up in conversation, how he avoided leaving bank statements where he used to, how he grew irritated when I lingered in the kitchen while he sorted mail. It wasn't that he was hiding everything well, it was that he believed I was someone who wouldn't look closely. He believed he'd shaped me into someone who accepted whatever story he fed me. That belief was his first mistake. The next clue came quietly. He left his jacket on the couch after coming home from what he claimed was a team dinner. While hanging it up, something slipped from the inside pocket, a folded restaurant receipt. It wasn't the meal itself that caught my attention. It was the signature at the bottom. Not his. A flourish distinctly feminine curved with practiced elegance. I didn't unfold it further. I didn't need to. The sound of the paper sliding back into the pocket was soft, but it echoed louder in me than anything Jason had said in weeks. I walked into the bedroom afterwards where he was sitting on the bed scrolling through his phone, the glow of the screen casting sharp angles across his face. "Everything okay?" he asked, not looking up. "Yes," I said. And it was true, because with every small fracture, the truth he'd tried to bury was rising closer to the surface. Over the next few days, the tension between us took a different shape. He started sighing more loudly, slamming doors a bit too hard, making little comments about how exhausting it was to handle everything. I didn't argue. I didn't challenge him. I let him build the narrative he needed to justify what he was planning. What he couldn't know was that I'd already begun to sort through the pieces, every receipt, every odd transaction, every shift in tone. One evening, while he sat on the couch pretending not to watch me across the room, his phone lit up again. The preview showed nothing but a first-name one I had never seen before. He grabbed the phone quickly, too quickly, and turned the screen away from me. His fingers trembled just slightly when he typed. That tremble was another fracture, and I felt it as surely as if the house had shifted on its foundation. He asked if I needed anything before he left for a late meeting. I told him no. He left. The moment the door closed, the house felt different, like it had finally decided to show me the truth it had been holding. I walked to the living room window and watched his taillights fade into the distance. The emptiness he left behind wasn't painful, it was clarifying. Silence can be an ally when you stop fearing it. There was one more moment that sealed the fracture into something undeniable. The next morning, as I made coffee, a ping sounded from his laptop on the counter. He had forgotten to close it. A small financial alert appeared in the corner of the screen, something he'd claimed he had canceled months ago. I didn't touch the laptop. I didn't open anything. I just looked at the notification long enough to memorize the shape of it, the color of the icon, the wording of the message. Then I closed the lid gently. The truth wasn't complete yet, but it was gathering form, gathering weight, gathering proof. And I was ready to carry it. Because the moment a fracture appears, the break is already on its way. The days leading into the public scene had a strange heaviness to them, as though the air itself noticed the shift before either of us said a word. Jason became louder in ways that didn't match the conversations we were having. He raised his voice when the topic didn't call for it, emphasized certain complaints as if rehearsing them for someone else's benefit, and lingered near windows that looked directly onto the street. It wasn't the kind of behavior meant for me. It was the kind meant for an audience. The neighborhood had a rhythm I knew well, sprinklers clicking on at certain hours, dogs barking at predictable moments, porch lights blinking on as the sun dipped, and Ruby Hernandez stepping out with her mug of tea right around sundown. She was the kind of neighbor who paid attention not in a nosy way, but in a way that made it impossible for anyone to pretend their actions happened in a vacuum. She didn't gossip, but she noticed. And lately Jason had been performing. One afternoon the sky hung low, with a gray filter that softened the world into muted colors. Jason walked from the car toward the house keys, jangling more dramatically than necessary. I stepped out to the porch because the air in the living room had become too thick with tension, and the moment he saw me there, his posture shifted. I watched him straighten his back, roll his shoulders, and put on an expression of aggrieved patience. He scanned the street, not subtly checking who might be outside. Ruby was watering her begonias. He saw her. His voice rose. "Did you pay that bill like I asked?" he said, tone clipped loud enough for the street to hear. I held the railing lightly, the metal cool against my palm. "Yes." I said calm because I knew what he wanted, and I refused to give it to him. He huffed, shaking his head, making sure to angle his body toward Ruby so she could see his irritation. He muttered something about always having to fix things, about always being the responsible one, but the words trailed off as Ruby paused her watering and looked up, her brow furrowed just slightly, tiny but sharp. She recognized the performance. A few minutes later, inside the house, Jason's voice dropped back to its normal register. He kicked off his shoes, tossed them carelessly into the corner, and said, "You didn't need to stand out there. It makes it look like you're waiting for me." The comment landed oddly, not because of what it meant, but because of what it revealed. He didn't like when I existed outside the script he'd written. He wanted me reactive, not observant. He wanted me framed, not centered. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, I sat at the dining table sorting through the day's mail. Nothing significant, but I was learning to treat even the smallest envelopes as data points. Jason paced behind me, sighing dramatically, scuffing his feet against the hardwood floor. "You know," he said suddenly, "you could try helping more." That was the moment I understood something important. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking at me, shaping phrases meant to echo in someone else's ears later. He wanted quotes, moments he could use. "Jason," I said quietly, "Ruby could hear you earlier." He froze for half a second, then shrugged too quickly. "So, she's always outside anyway." The reaction wasn't as casual as he wanted it to seem. Something in his tone tightened with fear. Fear of being seen not as the hard-working, patient husband he tried to portray, but as the man who raised his voice for sport. Later that night, while he was in the shower, I stepped onto the porch to breathe. The sky was fully dark now, the moon barely visible through the shifting clouds. Ruby's porch light was on. She sat in her rocking chair, phone in her hand, the screen glowing faintly. She looked over at me, her eyes soft with recognition. Not pity, not judgment, just honest acknowledgement. "You okay?" she asked, voice low enough that it didn't carry beyond the two of us. "I'm fine," I said, though the calmness in my voice wasn't for reassurance, it was for precision. Ruby nodded once slowly. "He's been loud lately." The understatement hovered between us. "He knows I'm watching," she added, tapping her phone lightly with her thumb, a habit of hers rhythmic and steady. I understood the message without her having to say it aloud. If something happened, she would see it. She would not look away. I slept lightly that night, aware of Jason moving around the house with restless energy. A drawer slammed at one point. A door clicked shut harder than it needed to. He was frustrated, but not with me, with the crumbling narrative. The next morning brought the smallest twist, but an important one. I stepped outside to bring in a package, and Ruby was already on her porch. Her phone angled slightly toward our driveway, not recording, but ready. She didn't say anything, didn't gesture, didn't even smile. She just watched. And Jason saw her watching. His reaction was immediate. His shoulders tensed, his jaw tightened, and his steps became more controlled, more deliberate. He hated being observed when he wasn't performing. He feared witnesses far more than he feared the truth itself. The day of the public scene didn't arrive with warning. It didn't need to. The tension in the house had been building like steam under a lid, hissing at the seams, waiting for the moment Jason would twist the knob too far. It was late afternoon, the kind where the sun felt stretched thin, and the colors of the neighborhood washed into muted shades of gold and gray. I stood in the living room folding laundry, something grounding, something that kept my hands busy while my mind stayed alert. Jason paced near the front door, muttering about stress, about how no one appreciates the weight he carries, as if the air needed to hear it more than I did. His voice had that rehearsed edge again, sharp enough to sound intentional but frayed at the ends. I kept folding. He kept pacing. The quiet between us thickened until it almost buzzed. When the knock came, a simple, ordinary knock, it startled him more than me. A package delivery. Nothing significant. But Jason reacted as though the world had handed him the perfect stage cue. "You forgot to bring in the last one," he snapped loud enough for the neighbors to hear, even through the closed door. I blinked slowly, letting his irritation wash past without catching. "You were the one home when it arrived," I reminded him. Not confrontational, not provoking, just factual. He didn't want factual. Facts were dangerous around him. He yanked the door open, stepped outside, and gestured sharply toward the package. "You can at least handle something this small," he said, projecting the words into the open air where anyone could catch them. That was when I noticed Ruby. She was on her porch mug in one hand, phone in the other. Not recording yet, but the angle was familiar, prepared, observant. Jason noticed her too. I watched the flicker of recognition cross his face, and with it came a decision. He leaned harder into the performance. "Honestly, Monica," he continued, "I'm exhausted. I can't keep doing everything." There was no anger behind his tone, only performance. Manufactured frustration. Practiced martyrdom. I stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking beneath my feet. The wind tugged at my hair as I bent to pick up the package. Jason stood in front of me, arms crossed, blocking the doorway, making sure he had the visual upper hand. "You need to start contributing," he said louder now. "People are starting to notice." He flicked his eyes toward Ruby as he said it. "Subtle enough to deny, obvious enough to land." Ruby lowered her mug slightly. Her phone angled just a tiny bit more. That was all the signal Jason needed to lose whatever control he had left. "I work all day," he said, stepping closer. "And you..." He cut himself off, realizing the line he wanted to use might expose too much. He recalibrated mid-sentence. "You don't understand how much pressure I'm under." I stood very still, not giving him the reaction he thought he was entitled to. "Jason," I said quietly, "lower your voice." His jaw clenched. He hated being told to lower anything, tone, expectations, ego. "Stop telling me what to do," he snapped. taking another step closer. I felt the heat of his breath, smelled the bitterness of the coffee he'd been drinking. He wanted to keep pushing, keep escalating, but now Ruby shifted fully into view. She stepped out from her porch, holding her phone at chest-level screen, unmistakably recording. "Everything okay over there?" she asked, her voice steady. Jason froze. For the first time in weeks, he lost the script. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He forced a smile so artificial it looked painful. "We're fine," he said, his tone suddenly sugary, almost trembling. "Just a little misunderstanding." Ruby didn't buy it. She took 2 more steps forward, making her presence undeniable. "I just want to be sure," she said. "You were yelling pretty loudly." Jason's face twitched, not enough for a stranger to notice, but enough for me to catch instantly. His eyes darted from her phone to my face, gauging how much damage he'd just done to his crafted persona. "We're fine," he repeated, weaker this time. He stepped back. "A retreat. Unexpected." He gestured for me to go inside first, as though opening the door for me would rewrite the last few minutes. But the performance had cracked. Ruby watched silently, her expression unreadable but unmistakably present. The moment we stepped inside, the air shifted again, this time sharper, colder. The door slammed shut behind us. Jason's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Why didn't you back me up out there?" he hissed. "You made me look bad." "I didn't say anything," I replied. "Exactly," he said. "You never say anything when it matters." I stared at him for a long moment, the echo of Ruby's recording imprinting itself across his panic. He wasn't afraid of me. He never had been. But he was terrified of being seen, terrified of losing the image he'd built. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. The man who shouted outside was only strong until someone else was watching. The morning after the scene with Ruby, Jason moved around the house with a stiffness that didn't match his usual arrogance. He wasn't angry. Anger had heat to it, and this was colder, more calculated, as though he were rearranging the narrative in his head and trying to decide where to place the blame. I kept my movements deliberate and quiet, not to avoid him, but because stillness let me observe the smallest shifts, the ones most people overlook. He left early, announcing it loudly enough for any neighbor within earshot, a performance meant to reassert his role as the hard-working husband. The front door slammed, the sound rippling through the house like an exhale I had been waiting for. When the silence settled, I gathered my bag and drove to work. The office felt almost soft in comparison, fluorescent lights humming, printers clicking, the low murmur of coworkers discussing claim adjustments. I walked in as if it were any other day, greeting Drew as he sorted through a stack of files taller than his coffee mug. He looked up, eyebrows raised slightly, sensing something but not asking. That was Drew, observant, but respectful of boundaries. I settled at my desk, logged into the billing system, and began reviewing a backlog of insurance verifications. The numbers and codes usually calmed me, their structure giving clarity where emotions muddied everything else. But that morning, clarity arrived in a different form. Around noon, Drew approached my desk, holding a printout and an uncertain expression. "Hey, Monica," he said, lowering his voice. "I need your eyes on something. It looks wrong." The page he handed me wasn't related to my current queue. It was a cross-department internal note, one I shouldn't typically receive unless someone routed it directly. The header listed the patient account number, the date of service, the procedure code, and beneath that a timestamp, 09:14 a.m., along with a reference ID, CLM 472816. What stopped me wasn't the procedure itself, it was the insurance portion flagged for manual review because of a mismatch in deductible reporting. Someone had requested a correction for an out-of-pocket maximum, but the adjustment didn't match the financial disclosures I had seen at home. It connected too cleanly, too coincidentally with the adjustments Jason had been trying to hide from me. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Drew scratched his head. "Honestly, no idea. It was misfiled, but the system won't let me clear it unless someone double-checks the data. Something's off." He sat at the edge of my desk, tapping the paper lightly. "The timestamp for starters. The request came in early yesterday, but the system shows a different user ID for the correction request. Weird." I examined the document more closely. The procedural correction referenced a payment amount Jason had argued with me about weeks earlier, claiming it had never gone through and that he'd had to cover it himself. But here it was, recorded, time-stamped, processed, and linked to a request for a correction someone tried to push through quietly. Not my name, not my account. But the numbers were identical. Evidence doesn't always arrive in the form you expect. Sometimes it slips into your hands because the universe is tired of watching someone lie. I sat with the page for a moment, letting the pieces rearrange themselves into something clearer. The timestamp, the reference ID, the user routing mismatch. Data doesn't lie. People do. "You okay?" Drew asked. I nodded once. "Yeah," I said. "This helps. Helps what he asked gently. Just gives me context." He didn't press. He didn't need to. When he walked away, the office felt louder somehow, like every machine and every click of the keyboard had turned into a metronome counting down. I printed a copy of the internal note not to take home, not yet, but to read more closely during my break. When I stepped outside onto the bench near the parking lot, I studied it again. Every detail lined up with Jason's shifting behavior, the timing, the hidden corrections, the unexplained tension. This was it. Every lie leaves a seam, and seams split under pressure. The echo of the motif rang true. The seam was widening. After work, I sat in my car for a long moment before turning the key. The air smelled faintly of warm plastic and winter, and I rested my hands on the steering wheel, absorbing the quiet. Evidence number 1 was real, concrete, undeniable. He couldn't talk over it, couldn't twist it, couldn't bury it. When I drove home, the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one, glowing like small, watchful eyes. Jason's car was already in the driveway. I parked, stepped out, and walked to the door with deliberate calm. Inside, he was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone, his jaw tight. He didn't look up when I entered. "You're late," he said. "Not a question, a judgment." "Work was busy," I replied, setting my bag down. "Convenient," he muttered. Something in his tone suggested he was preparing another scene, another performance for someone who might be watching outside. But he didn't know yet, not really, that the power he was clinging to was already slipping. I watched him for a moment, absorbing every detail, every twitch of insecurity beneath his practiced superiority. Evidence isn't just data. It's the shift that happens when truth starts aligning with what your instincts already knew. And in that moment, I could feel it happening. The truth was no longer quiet, it was sharpening. Jason sensed the shift before I said a single word. It was in the way he kept glancing at me across the kitchen that evening, his eyes sharp with suspicion, his movements edged with the kind of nervous energy a person gets when they know the story they've been writing is starting to unravel. He stirred his coffee too long, tapping the spoon against the mug in a rapid rhythm he couldn't disguise. I watched him deliberately, not because I needed confirmation, but because people reveal the most when they're trying to hide the least. He cleared his throat. "You're quiet," he said. "The accusation hung between us." "You usually are, but this feels different." I didn't answer right away. Silence had always unsettled him more than confrontation. "Some days are heavier than others," I said finally. He frowned, not because he cared, but because he didn't like not knowing what part of the script I was playing. He leaned back against the counter arms, crossed, studying me with narrowed eyes. "If you're trying to make me feel guilty, it won't work," he said. I almost laughed, not because the comment surprised me, but because guilt was the last thing I needed from him. What I needed was clarity, and the truth was delivering it steadily, piece by piece. I walked past him to the sink, rinsed my hands, and let the warm water run over my fingers. The sound filled the kitchen, a soft hiss that made Jason more agitated. He hated background noise when he couldn't control the foreground conversation. "What happened at work today?" he asked suddenly. The question wasn't casual. His voice tightened on the last word. I dried my hands slowly. "A lot of things happen at work," I said. "You'll have to be more specific." He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like he wanted to ask something else but couldn't frame it in a way that didn't expose him. His jaw clenched. He grabbed his phone from the counter and held it like it was a shield. "Are you checking up on me?" The irony nearly made me smile. "Why would I asked. "You said you handle everything." His face twitched barely but enough. He didn't like having his words mirrored back at him. He preferred when they echoed without challenge. A moment later, the front door swung open and Evelyn stepped inside without knocking, something she only did when she felt a crisis brewing. Jason stiffened instantly, switching to the version of himself he reserved for her, the weary victim, the overworked martyr, the misunderstood husband. "Mom," he said with forced relief. "Good timing." Evelyn set her purse on the chair with a heavy thud. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she said, glancing at me briefly before focusing entirely on her son. "You shouldn't have to shoulder so much." I inhaled slowly, letting her words settle in the air. Jason straightened, encouraged by her validation. "Exactly," he said. "Finally, someone sees it." Evelyn looked me up and down the way someone appraises a thrift store item, checking seams, looking for defects, assuming the worst. "Jason mentioned you've been difficult lately," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Difficult?" I repeated. She nodded, lips pursed. "Marriage only works when both people contribute, dear," Jason added. Which I keep telling her. I considered their synchronized performance, the way they fed each other lines without needing direction. They didn't realize how transparent it looked now that I had evidence. Real evidence, not just instinct to anchor the truth. I folded my arms, mirroring Jason inadvertently, and watched him recoil at the gesture. He didn't like seeing his posture reflected back at him. "What exactly do you think I'm not contributing?" I asked Evelyn calmly. Jason shot her a look that said, "Don't answer that," but arrogance always overrode his caution. Evelyn smoothed her scarf. "Financial stability, emotional support, practical effort. Jason does so much." I tilted my head. "Does he?" The question wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through the room. Jason flinched. His fingers drummed against the table, fast, uneven. That nervous rhythm again. "People have tells," His were getting louder.
"Let's not do this,"
Jason said, forcing a laugh too thin to hold weight. Mom came to help, not to help with what I asked. Framing a story? Evelyn's eyes sharpened.
"Excuse me."
The house felt smaller suddenly, the walls tightening as the tension swelled. Ruby's presence across the street flickered through my memory. Her quiet awareness, her recording phone. Witnesses mattered now. Evidence mattered even more. And Jason could feel the walls shifting. He stepped closer, lowering his voice.
"Stop trying to twist things. You confuse situations on purpose."
I blinked at him.
"Do I?"
Yes, he said too quickly.
"Too loud."
His voice cracked just slightly, sharp enough to hear, subtle enough he hoped no one would catch it.
"But I caught it. Evelyn caught it."
The truth was widening its seam. I let a long silence fall between us. That was when the last fracture of the evening arrived, the smallest but sharpest one. Jason's phone buzzed on the counter. A bank app notification appeared on the lock screen. He lunged for it, covering it with his hand, but I'd already seen enough an automated message with a transaction alert. He tried to hide the screen so quickly he knocked over the salt shaker, the grain scattering across the counter like tiny points of light. Evelyn frowned.
"Jason? What was that?" "Nothing,"
he snapped. Then softer work stuff. The lie was brittle. It cracked the moment it left his mouth. A new stillness filled the kitchen, not silence, but stillness. The kind that forms when a truth is coiling beneath the surface, ready to rise. Jason swallowed hard, trying to gather his composure. His voice when he spoke again was thinner than paper.
"We should all calm down."
I looked at him steadily, letting the quiet speak for me. He shifted under my gaze, his confidence slipping like water through his hands. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of what I now understood. The night after Evelyn's visit carried a strange electricity, as though the air itself had begun listening more closely. Jason moved through the rooms with a jumpiness he tried to disguise as irritation, but every gesture he made had an edge, sharper, quicker, more revealing than he intended. He kept checking his phone the way someone checks a locked door after hearing a noise outside, fast, guilty, repetitive. Each time the screen lit up, he angled it away from me with emotion so practiced it bordered on instinct. I didn't ask questions. Questions would have given him room to spin new lies, and I preferred watching the old ones unravel on their own. Instead, I let the evening unfold with calm precision. I cooked dinner, the soft hiss of the pan overtaking the thick silence between us. He hovered near the doorway, eyes darting toward every faint sound, every shift in my expression.
"You're acting strange,"
he said suddenly. The accusation came out thin, stretched tight like a thread fraying at the ends. "Strange?" I repeated.
"How so?"
"You're too quiet." He frowned. "You're always quiet, but this is different." I stirred the vegetables slowly, letting the steam rise between us. "Maybe I'm just paying attention," I said. That shut him up. For a moment. After dinner, he retreated to the living room, pretending to scroll through news on his phone, but his attention kept drifting toward me, searching for confirmation of whatever fear he hadn't admitted to himself yet. I sat at the table reviewing some work notes and pretending not to notice how restless he had become. Around 9, he got up abruptly and walked to the bedroom, shutting the door harder than necessary. I waited a minute, then stood and moved toward the counter where he'd left a small stack of mail earlier. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but sometimes truth hides in plain sight. Buried between a furniture ad and a charity flyer was a half-crumpled bank mailing one Jason clearly hadn't meant to mix into the open stack. I unfolded it without tearing the edges. It wasn't a full statement. Not even close. Just a notice of an irregular transaction review listing an amount and the last 4 digits of the checking account. It was small, incomplete, but I knew Jason well enough to understand what the paper meant. He was scrambling. And scrambling men leave traces. I slipped the letter back exactly where it was, then sat at the table again, heart-steady thoughts sharp. Later that night, I heard Jason's muffled voice from the bedroom, frustrated, urgent, not quite whispering. I moved quietly down the hallway until I reached the doorway. The crack under the door leaked a thin slice of lamplight. "No, I said it has to be today." He snapped into the phone. A pause. "I don't care what you have to do, fix it." Another pause. "No, she doesn't know anything." I stepped back before the floor creaked. When he emerged minutes later, he found me sitting on the couch, calm, unbothered. His eyes narrowed. What he asked. Nothing I said. Just thinking. He hated that answer because thinking was the one thing he couldn't monitor. The next morning brought the shift that pushed everything into the open. I left for work earlier than usual, using my office's quiet to sort my thoughts. Drew waved as I walked in, but today I wasn't seeking his help. I needed to confirm something alone. During my break, I logged into our internal portal, not the billing system, but the external benefits dashboard employees used for direct deposit and payroll verification. It wasn't related to my job role. It was tied to my employee account. And that was the key. The portal included a link to my bank routing through the payroll service. I clicked through slowly, carefully, and opened my account summary. The transactions were clean. Expected. But the joint account, the one Jason insisted we keep for bills, only had a pending transaction that wasn't listed in our ledger at home. A withdrawal scheduled for the next day. The amount wasn't small. It wasn't catastrophic either. It was strategic. Withdraw just enough, hide it in enough small pieces, and a spouse who doesn't understand finances will never notice. But I did. The transaction ID blinked in the corner of the screen. I committed it to memory, 8741199, BR7. The branch code followed CH22. Evidence number 2 was forming. All it needed was confirmation. I closed everything, logged out, and sat still. My heartbeat didn't rise. My breath didn't quicken. Truth has a way of settling inside you when it aligns with what you already know. After work, I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the cold air cool my thoughts. When I pulled into the driveway, Jason was already waiting at the door, pacing like a man rehearsing excuses. "We need to talk," he said before I even reached the steps. I walked past him into the house. "Then talk." He shut the door sharply. "Why are you going through our accounts?" I turned slowly. "Our accounts." He flinched. A small movement, but clear. "I saw the alert," he said. "You logged in today?" "I logged into my payroll," I corrected. "Connected accounts are visible." His nostrils flared, panic slipping through the cracks of his expression. "You're overstepping." I tilted my head. "Am I?" He stepped closer. "You don't need to worry about the money. I've got it handled." "Handled," I repeated. "Like the correction request you lied about?" His face drained. He hadn't expected that. He opened his mouth, closed it, then grabbed onto the nearest excuse. "I was trying to fix something for us." "For us," I echoed. "Or for yourself." His eyes flicked everywhere but at me, toward the door, the window, the floor. Anywhere truth couldn't reach him. "You're twisting things," he insisted. "You don't understand how complicated finances are." It was the wrong line, the last line he should have chosen. For years, he believed he was the only one who understood anything involving money, paperwork, responsibility. But he forgot something important. I worked with financial data every day. Numbers never scared me. Only lies did. I stepped toward him until we were inches apart. He swallowed Adam's apple, bobbing rapidly. He wasn't looking at a wife anymore. He was looking at someone who finally had the full picture. And he knew without question that the second piece of evidence was already in my hands. Jason stood in front of me like a man trying to keep a dam from bursting with his bare hands. The panic in his eyes wasn't the kind that comes from guilt alone. It was the panic of someone who finally realizes the person he underestimated is now holding the truth he thought he'd buried. His breath came faster, shallow, each inhale edging toward desperation. I waited. Stillness has always been my sharpest instrument. "Monica," he said, voice tight, "you're blowing this out of proportion." I didn't move. The withdrawal, I raised an eyebrow. "The one scheduled for tomorrow, transaction 874119, BR7 branch code, CH22. His entire body jerked like he'd been physically struck. He hadn't expected specifics. He hadn't expected me to have the words, the numbers, the exact codes that stripped his excuses bare. "You're looking at things without context," he said quickly. "You always do that. You latch onto details you don't understand." That line would have worked on the version of me he had cultivated for years, the version he believed didn't question, didn't verify, didn't see. But that version was gone. Maybe she had never existed at all. "Explain the context then," I said. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but nothing came out. He paced, running a hand through his hair, muttering half-formed rationalizations he couldn't commit to. "It's complicated," he finally said, grasping onto the phrase like it might protect him. "You wouldn't get it." "Then make it simple," I replied. He flinched again. Every time I asked for honesty, he recoiled like the concept was foreign. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a forced calm. "Listen, things have been tight. I've been trying to handle it without worrying you. So you hid transactions. I didn't hide anything." He snapped. "I just managed it. You requested a correction on a claim you told me never existed," I said. "You withdrew money without telling me. You redirected funds. You lied." His face twisted, frustration warring with fear. "I didn't lie," he insisted, but the word came out brittle, cracking at the edges. I watched him unravel piece by piece. His denial wasn't about convincing me anymore. It was about convincing himself. "You're doing this on purpose," he said suddenly, voice rising. "You're trying to make me look like some kind of monster. I don't have to make you look like anything I said. You've already done that." That stopped him cold. For a moment, everything in the room stilled the air, the shadows, even his breathing. Then, as if the silence threatened to expose him further, he moved to reclaim control the only way he knew how. "If you're going to act like this," he said sharply, "maybe you should leave for a while. Cool off somewhere else. You clearly can't think straight." There it was, the beginning of the end, the echo of the moment he would eventually shove me out the door. He thought he was rewriting the story in his favor. He thought he could erase the truth by removing me from the frame. "You want me to leave?" I repeated. "Yes," he said, crossing his arms. "Until you're rational." I looked at him for a long moment, letting the weight of his words settle. He didn't realize that by pushing me away, he was placing me exactly where I needed to be to see the next piece of evidence clearly. I walked into the bedroom not to pack, but to sit, to breathe, to let the truth settle fully. Evidence number 2 wasn't just a pending transaction. It was the entire pattern behind it, the lies, the deflections, the corrections hidden behind bureaucratic language and half-truths. I opened my notebook, one he never bothered to check, and wrote down everything: the amount, the timestamp, the branch code, the way he reacted when I said the numbers aloud. Then I wrote a second line underneath, crisp clean. He is hiding money from me. The sentence didn't shake me. It clarified me. Later, as I sat alone, I heard him in the hallway pacing again. He paused outside the bedroom, breathing hard. "If you're going to be dramatic," he said through the door, "maybe we should talk about separating accounts. I can't keep carrying your share." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because the truth had already moved past words. Inside the silence, I felt something shift inside me, not fear, not anger, but resolve. The kind that reshapes the ground beneath your feet. The kind that prepares you for the moment the story turns. When I finally emerged from the room, Jason was standing in the kitchen holding his phone again, as if the device could shield him from consequences. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said stiffly. "Right now you're not thinking logically." I walked past him without a word. The truth didn't need defending. It was already standing tall, ready for the next crack in the structure he'd built, and by then even he could feel it. The foundation of his lies was beginning to collapse. The house felt different the next morning, hollow like an empty shell trying to remember the shape of the life it once held. Jason wasn't performing anymore. Performances require an audience, and after last night he sensed he'd lost control of the narrative. He moved through the kitchen with frantic energy disguised as routine, opening cabinets he didn't need, slamming drawers he normally ignored. Every movement was too loud, too sharp, like he was trying to drown out the truth gathering in the corners of the room. I stepped into the doorway and watched him without speaking. His shoulders tensed the moment he noticed me. "I didn't sleep," he said as if I'd asked. I nodded once. I could tell. He ran a hand over his face, pacing again. "You were out of line last night," he said. "You twisted everything I said." I kept my tone even. "I repeated what you said." He stopped pacing. His eyes flashed. "You think you're clever," he snapped. "You think you figured something out?" "I know what you're doing," I replied, "and I know why you're doing it." His breath hitched just slightly, but enough to break his composure. He leaned against the counter, gripping the edge like he needed the furniture to keep him upright. "You don't understand," he said, voice shaking with forced calm. "I've been under pressure. Things got tight. I made some decisions I had to make." Without telling me, I said. Without asking, he shot back. "You're impossible to talk to about money. I work with financial corrections all day," I reminded him. "You know that." He waved a hand dismissively. "Not the same thing." It was, and he knew it. He just needed a version of the truth he could survive. While he spiraled, I walked to the living room and picked up the mail from the previous day. A small envelope sat on top, a routine letter from his employer. But as I turned it in my hand, the corner was wrinkled like it had been hastily shoved into the mailbox. Jason noticed immediately. "Don't open that," he said sharply. I paused. "Why not?" "It's addressed to both of us." His jaw clenched. "It's private." I opened it. Slowly, silently. Inside was a notice requesting clarification on an expense submitted through his work account, an expense that didn't match the payroll records. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. But it was enough to tell me that the lies weren't just at home. They bled into his job, his paperwork, his financial footprint, and now someone else had noticed.
"What is this?" I asked.
His nostrils flared.
"You weren't supposed to see that." "Why?" I asked. "Because it contradicts the story you've been feeding me."
He stepped toward me, hands shaking as he reached for the letter.
"Give it to me."
I didn't move.
"Jason, if this is nothing, why are you panicked?"
"I'm not panicked," he said through clenched teeth.
"I'm frustrated. There's a difference."
He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a buzz came from his phone on the counter. He lunged for it.
Too fast.
Too desperate.
"Who was that?" I asked.
"Nobody,"
he snapped.
The word hung heavy.
Nobody always means somebody.
He shoved the phone into his pocket and turned away, pacing again. I watched his hands tremble as he ran his fingers through his hair.
"You're twisting everything," he said again, louder this time.
"You're trying to make me look like the villain."
"I don't need to make you look like anything I said. Your choices are doing that."
The tension in the room stretched until it felt like the walls themselves were listening.
"What do you want from me?"
he shouted. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked past him, opened the front door, and stepped outside. The cold air hit my face, grounding me in the present. Across the street, Ruby stood on her porch holding her morning tea. She saw me, and her expression shifted from curiosity to quiet understanding. Jason appeared behind me in the doorway.
"Why are you going outside?" he demanded. "Get back in here."
I didn't turn around.
"The world doesn't stop at the front door," I said.
He grabbed my arm, not hard, but with the desperation of a man trying to hold on to something slipping through his fingers.
"Don't walk away from me,"
he said, voice cracking. Ruby's eyes sharpened. She didn't lift her phone, but she didn't need to. Her presence was enough. I gently pulled my arm free and turned to face him. His chest rose and fell rapidly, panic clawing at the edges of his control.
"Jason!" I said, "Something is coming, and it's not coming from me."
He blinked, confused.
"What does that mean?"
I stepped closer, lowering my voice.
"It means that when people bury the truth, it doesn't disappear. It just waits."
His face drained of color. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing violently.
"You don't know what you're talking about,"
he whispered. But he knew. He knew exactly what I meant. His job, his accounts, his corrections, his lies. They were unraveling faster than he could patch them. He stepped back into the doorway, gripping the frame like the house was the only thing holding him upright. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of losing control of me. He was afraid of losing control of everything else. By the time the next morning arrived, the house felt like a structure built out of paper, one sharp breath away from collapsing. Jason barely spoke, pacing between the kitchen and the hallway with the unsteady rhythm of someone waiting for a verdict. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed, and every few minutes he checked his phone with trembling hands. He wasn't checking for messages from me. He was checking for consequences. I poured myself coffee, the slow drip, and faint aroma filling the silence he couldn't bear. He watched me from across the room, jittery, almost vibrating with dread.
"We need to talk," he said.
The line came out thin-stripped of the superiority he used to deliver it with. I sat at the table and looked at him steadily.
"Then talk."
He swallowed.
"I just Things got complicated at work. There were misunderstandings. The expense report, I asked. He stiffened. How did you... It was in the mail, Jason. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing again. It's not what it looks like. Then tell me what it looks like, I said. He paced faster. I don't owe you every detail of my job. But you owe your employer the truth, I said. He froze. Completely. The words hit him like a physical blow. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing in suspicion and fear. What do you mean by that? Your employer flagged the discrepancy. They already noticed something was off. His jaw clenched. It was a mistake. Mistakes don't require 3 correction requests, I said, sliding the folded letter onto the table. 3! His voice cracked. He grabbed the letter, scanned it, and the color drained from his face as he realized what the notice actually meant. It wasn't just a request for clarification. It was an audit initiation. Someone had reviewed his submitted expense documents and found mismatched amounts that connected directly to the transactions he'd tried to hide at home. A visible, documented, undeniable consequence. His knees gave out more than bent, landing him in the chair across from me with a thud that shook the table. No, he whispered. No. This isn't happening. He clutched his head. I can fix it. I'll talk to them. I'll explain. Explain what I asked quietly. That you hid money from your household, that you falsified an expense to cover it, that the transaction didn't match the payroll records. Stop, he snapped. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, I replied. And more importantly, your employer does too. He shook his head violently as if trying to dislodge the truth from his ears. They'll fire me, he whispered. They'll think I did something illegal. Silence settled heavy and sharp. I didn't fill it. He lifted his head slowly, eyes wide, desperate. You have to help me, he said. Please. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them the bank messed something up. Tell them I cut him off. Jason, I'm not lying for you. Why not? His voice cracked into something childish. You're my wife. And you threw me out, I reminded him. You hid money? You lied. You tried to paint me as dead weight so you could justify your choices. He stood abruptly, knocking the chair backward. If you don't help me, I'll lose everything. You already lost everything I said. You just didn't notice when it happened. He staggered back, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His phone buzzed, then one single sharp vibration that cut through the room like a blade. He didn't want to look at it. That alone told me everything. Check it, I said. He shook his head. No. Check it. Hands shaking, he pulled the phone from his pocket and unlocked the screen. I watched as his eyes darted over the notification and email from HR. His breath hitched. He clicked it. Read it. The silence that followed was absolute. They suspended me, he whispered. Pending review. The word suspended hung between us like a swinging door, fully visible, fully deserved. His fingers loosened and the phone clattered onto the counter. He sank to the floor, shoulders shaking not from sadness, but from the terror of losing the story he believed he controlled. I stepped closer, not to comfort him, but to look him in the eyes. He lifted his head slowly, tears streaking down his face. Please, he begged, voice breaking. Please, help me. Fix this. I'll do anything. I'll change. I'll stop. I'll tell you everything. Just please.
His knees hit the tile again, harder this time. He stayed there, palms flat on the floor, bowed by the consequences he created with his own hands. The truth wasn't just standing now, it was demanding to be seen, and he finally had no place left to hide. The present always returns with a sharper edge than memory, and when it does, it slices clean through every illusion left standing. That's what I felt in the doorway that morning. The same doorway Jason had shoved me through days earlier. The same cold concrete beneath my feet, the same porch light flickering like it couldn't decide whether to illuminate the truth or hide it. But this time I wasn't the one standing outside. He was. And he wasn't lecturing me. He wasn't towering above me in a carefully curated stance of superiority. He was on his knees. Literally. Knees pressed into the cold concrete hands clasped together, shoulders hunched not out of humility, but out of collapse. He had finally reached the place where lies can't hold weight anymore. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Monica, please." The sound of it echoed through the morning air, weak and desperate, nothing like the booming authority he'd used when he told me I brought nothing into this marriage. Now he clung to every breath like it was the last rope keeping him from falling straight into the truth he'd spent years burying. I didn't step toward him. I didn't speak. I simply stood in the doorway watching him tremble in the exact threshold where he once stood, smugly convincing himself he was untouchable. Behind him, the neighborhood was slowly waking, lights flickering on a car engine, starting a dog barking in the distance. And Ruby, silent as ever, stood on her porch, leaning slightly forward with her mug in her hand. Not recording, not intervening, just witnessing. That was enough. Jason lifted his head, eyes red and swollen. "They suspended me," he whispered, as if I didn't already know. "They said the discrepancies were too serious. They're investigating. I don't know what to do." I stayed silent. The truth didn't need my voice to validate it anymore. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I never meant for it to get this bad," he said. "I thought I could fix things before anyone noticed. I thought..." His voice broke again, collapsing into a whisper. "I thought you wouldn't find out." That made me blink, not because the words hurt, but because they revealed more than he realized. He hadn't protected me. He had underestimated me. He believed I wouldn't look, wouldn't listen, wouldn't connect the dots. And that belief had paved the road to his downfall more efficiently than any lie he ever told. I stepped onto the porch, slow and steady, letting the chill settle into my lungs. Truth stands when everything built on it collapses. I said softly, not as a threat, but as a fact. His face crumpled. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Recognition that the person he thought was small had been carrying truths so much heavier than his ego ever imagined. "I need you," he said. "I need you to help me, to talk to them, to fix this." I studied him for a long moment. The man kneeling in front of me wasn't the one who shoved my suitcase out the door. That man was arrogant, performative, convinced of his own brilliance. This man was the result of every lie unraveling. A man finally forced to face himself. "You didn't need me, then," I said calmly. "When you lied, when you hid money, when you rewrote the story to make me look weak. You only need me now because the truth caught up to you." He reached forward, grabbing the hem of my coat like a drowning man grabbing the edge of a lifeboat. "I'll change," he begged. "I swear. I'll do whatever you want. I'll tell you everything. Just don't leave me." His voice shook so violently it almost broke into pieces. I gently stepped back, pulling my coat free. His hands dropped to his knees. "You keep asking me to fix what you broke," I said, "but that's not my job." He shook his head, tears running freely now. "Please." A small, sharp ache tugged at the edge of my chest, but not for him, for the years, for the quiet versions of myself I'd folded away to keep peace in a house that had no intention of holding it, for the truth I had carried alone until it finally demanded to be seen. I looked at the street, at the soft morning light creeping over the rooftops, at Ruby's steady gaze. And in that moment, I understood something simple and clean. I wasn't standing in this doorway to decide his fate. I was standing here to decide mine. "Jason," I said finally, "you fell because you kept building your life on lies. And now you want me to stand underneath the wreckage with you." "I just need one more chance," he whispered. "You had hundreds," I replied, his head-lowered forehead touching the concrete as he sobbed silently. I didn't step closer. I didn't lift him. I didn't offer comfort. Instead, I turned around, walked into the house, and closed the door with the same soft click he once believed would trap me outside. This time, it wasn't a cage closing. It was a chapter ending. I breathed deeply, letting the quiet settle into my bones. The house felt different now. Not hollow, not sharp, just still. Stillness I had earned. Stillness I could finally claim. And behind the door on the other side of the truth, he stayed on his knees while I walked forward.